the frontier, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. A young rancher named Owen Hayes lived alone on his family's property, untouched by a woman's hands, unprepared for what the wilderness would bring to his doorstep. When he found them stealing provisions from his storage shed under the pale morning light, he should have reached for his rifle. But something in the way they moved, a silent, coordinated grace, something in the defiant set of their identical shoulders, froze him where he stood. They were Chinese, twins, and the words they would speak to him days later would shatter every wall he had built around his lonely heart. What he didn't know was that Mai and Lin weren't just hungry for food. And what they didn't know was that the virgin rancher watching them from the shadows would become the one thing more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. Owen had been alone for 8 months since his father died from fever, leaving him the ranch and nothing else but silence. He woke each morning to emptiness, worked the land until his hands bled, and fell asleep to the sound of his own breathing. The isolation had become a second skin. Comfortable in its predictability, no one came this far out. No one bothered him until the morning he heard something moving in his supply shed. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Hired thugs had been spotted 2 territories over, men who killed for less than a horse. His boots made no sound on the packed earth as he approached the weathered wooden structure. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, he could see shadows moving between the sacks of grain and preserved goods. Owen raised the rifle, finger hovering over the trigger. Then the figure stepped into the light streaming through the doorway, and every thought in his head went silent. They were identical, so much so it took his breath away. Slender but strong, with black hair braided into 2 matching plaits that fell down their backs. Their skin was the color of pale tea, their features delicate but etched with hardship. They wore simple cotton trousers and tunics that had seen hard use, and they moved as one, a mirror image of quiet efficiency. 2 Chinese women, alone, stealing from his supplies with the calm focus of people who had done this before. Their eyes met his at the same moment, dark, almond-shaped pools that held no fear, only calculation. They were measuring him, deciding if he was a threat. Their hands didn't move toward any visible weapon, but he could see the readiness in their bodies, the coiled tension of people who knew how to survive. Owen should have shouted, should have ordered them off his land, should have fired a warning shot, but the words caught in his throat. There was something in their faces, something raw and haunted that he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. One of them turned away from him deliberately and picked up a sack of dried meat. Not running, not asking permission, just taking what they needed as if he wasn't standing there with a rifle pointed at her back. His finger loosened on the trigger. Wait, the word came out rougher than he intended. They both froze, then slowly turned their heads to look at him over their shoulders in perfect synchrony. Eyebrows raised in question or challenge. He couldn't tell which. Owen lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking and he didn't know if it was from fear or something else entirely. You don't have to steal it, their eyes narrowed. They didn't trust him. He could see it in every line of their bodies, but they didn't leave either. They stood there holding the single sack of meat, waiting to see what he would do next, waiting to see if he was another white man with pretty words and ugly intentions. He took a step back, giving them space, giving them the option to run if they wanted. Take what you need. Just don't come back. For a long moment, they stared at him. Then, without a word, they grabbed 2 more sacks each, slinging them over their shoulders with a strength that shouldn't have surprised him, but did, and walked past him out of the shed. So close he could smell rain and jasmine on their skin. So close he could see the faint, identical scar above their right eyebrows. They didn't thank him, didn't look back, just walked toward the tree line where the wilderness began. Their stride long and purposeful. He watched until they disappeared into the shadows between the cottonwoods, his heart still pounding, his mind full of questions he had no answers for. But what Owen didn't see was that 50 paces into the forest, Mai and Lin stopped. They set down the sacks and turned to look back at the ranch house, at the young man standing frozen by his supply shed. And for the first time in 6 months, something stirred in their chests that wasn't grief or rage. It was curiosity. And curiosity, they knew, was dangerous. 3 days passed before Owen saw them again. 3 days of checking over his shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of lying awake, wondering if they would come back, wondering if he wanted them to. He was repairing the fence along the eastern pasture when he felt it. That prickling sensation of being watched. His hand stilled on the rough wood, splinters pressing into his palms. He didn't turn around. Didn't want to spook them if it was them, didn't want to seem afraid if it wasn't. Slowly, he went back to work, driving the wooden post into the hard ground with steady strikes of the mallet. Each impact sent vibrations up his arms. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool morning air. And through it all, he felt those eyes on him. After an hour, he couldn't take it anymore. He turned. One of them was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 paces away, not hiding, just watching. The morning sun caught the sheen of her black hair, and even from this distance, he could see the intensity in her gaze. She wasn't looking at him the way someone looks at a threat. She was studying him like a puzzle she was trying to solve. Their eyes locked, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something Owen didn't have words for. His mouth went dry. His pulse kicked up in a way that had nothing to do with the physical labor. She tilted her head slightly, and the corner of her mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, more like she had discovered something amusing. Then she turned and disappeared back into the forest. Owen stood there, hammer hanging loose in his grip, his breath coming faster than it should. What were they doing? Why come back just to watch? The question circled in his mind like buzzards over a carcass, picking at his concentration for the rest of the day. The next morning, they were there again, this time closer, sitting together on a fallen log just beyond his property line. Arms crossed, watching him work on the corral gate. They made no attempt to hide, no pretense of secrecy, just sat there as bold as sunrise. He tried to ignore them. Lasted maybe 10 minutes before his curiosity won. He set down his tools and walked toward them. Each step feeling like it carried more weight than it should. They didn't move, didn't react, just watched him approach with those dark, unreadable eyes. He stopped at the property line, an invisible boundary none of them had crossed yet. Up close, he could see details he had missed before. The way their clothing was worn, but immaculately clean, the slight calluses on their fingers. The way they held themselves like coiled springs, ready to explode into motion at any moment. Why do you keep coming back? His voice came out rougher than intended. One of them, the one who seemed to be the speaker, answered, her English accented, but clear. You are not what we expected. What did you expect? Violence. Cruelty. The things white men usually offer. She stood, and the other rose with her in a single, fluid motion. They were not tall, but they held themselves with a presence that made them seem larger. But you gave us food. You let us go. Why? Owen swallowed hard. The question felt like a trap, but he didn't know how. You looked like you needed it more than I did. Something shifted in their expressions, not softening exactly, but the hard edges seemed to blur slightly. You live alone, the first one stated. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. So do we? She said it like a confession, like admitting to some kind of weakness she wasn't used to acknowledging. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted with things none of them knew how to say. Owen could smell jasmine on them again, mixed with leather and something earthier. Could see the rise and fall of their chests as they breathed. Could feel the heat radiating off their skin despite the cool air. My name is Owen. They studied him for another long moment. Then, the speaker said, I am my. This is my sister, Lynn. The name settled between them like stones dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward. My turn to leave, but this time she looked back at him before they disappeared into the trees. And in that glance, Owen saw something that made his stomach tighten with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They would be back tomorrow, and he wouldn't be able to stop thinking about them until they were. They came back the next day at noon when the sun was highest and the shadows shortest. But this time, they didn't stay at the tree line. This time they walked straight across his property, past the corral, past the supply shed, right up to where he sat on the porch steps eating a piece of dried meat and stale bread. Owen froze, the bread halfway to his mouth. His heart hammered so hard he thought they might hear it. Mai and Lin stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to look at them. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in their dark eyes. "You are afraid of us," Mai said. Not a question, an observation. "I'm not," he stopped. Lying seemed pointless. "Maybe a little." "Good. Fear keeps you alive." She sat down beside him on the step. Lin remained standing a few feet away, a silent guardian. Mai was close enough that her shoulder almost touched his. Almost. The nearness made his skin prickle with awareness. "But that is not why your hands shake when we are near." Heat flooded his face. He set the bread down, suddenly having no appetite. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him fully, and the directness in her gaze stripped away every defense he might have tried to build. "You watch us the way a starving man watches food. The way a man in the desert watches water." Owen's throat closed. He wanted to deny it. Wanted to stand up and walk away. Wanted to do anything except sit there under the weight of her attention, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Mai leaned closer. Her breath was warm against his cheek. "We have not been with a man in 6 months. Not since our father died. Do you know what 6 months of wanting feels like, Owen?" The world narrowed to just the two of them, and Lin, a watchful shadow. Just the heat of Mai's body next to his. Just the low rasp of her voice speaking words that set fire to every nerve he had. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Tried again. "I wouldn't know." She pulled back slightly, studying his face. Something like understanding dawned in her eyes. Then something else, something that might have been hunger. "You have never been with a woman," it wasn't a question. But shame burned through him anyway. At 24, he should have. Should have done a lot of things. But living out here alone, no town for miles, no neighbors, no one but him and the land and the silence. "No," he admitted, the word barely a whisper. Mai's hand came up, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it might have been imagined. Except his skin burned everywhere she touched. "That is not something to be ashamed of." "Then why do I feel like it is?" "Because you think it makes you less." Her thumb brushed across his lower lip and his breath caught. "But maybe it makes you more." Before he could ask what she meant, before he could process the feeling of her hand on his skin, she and Lin stood abruptly, their whole bodies going taut, heads turning toward the eastern trees. Owen saw it then, what they had heard before him. Movement in the forest. Not one person, several. "They are looking for us," Mai said, her voice gone flat and cold. The woman who had been touching his face was gone, replaced by the survivor he had first seen in his supply shed. Her hand went to the small knife at her belt, and Lin's hand did the same. "Who?" "The men we ran from. We have been gone too long." She looked down at him, and for the first time, he saw something like regret in her eyes. "They will not understand why we are here. They will not understand you." 3 rough-looking men emerged from the tree line. White men, armed with pistols and rifles, faces hard with suspicion. They saw Mai and Lin standing over him, saw him sitting at their feet. The lead man's eyes narrowed, and he barked something that Owen didn't understand, but felt in his gut like a punch. Mai answered in flawless, cold English, her voice sharp and defiant. The man took a step forward, hand tightening on his pistol. The other 2 fanned out, surrounding them. Owen stood slowly, hands visible and empty. His mind raced through options. None of them good. These men could kill him without breaking a sweat. Could burn his ranch and ride away before anyone knew what happened. And the sisters, standing between him and them, looked like they were weighing whether to fight or run. The lead man spoke again, and this time Mai's shoulders tensed. Whatever he said, it wasn't a request. It was a command. She turned to look at Owen one last time. In that look was everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building between them over these few short days, and something else, something that looked like a promise. Then she and Lin walked toward the men, and Owen's hands clenched into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to stop them, even though he knew it would mean his death. 2 nights later, Owen woke to the sound of something hitting his window. A pebble, then another. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the glass, heart pounding. In the moonlight, he saw them. Mai and Lin stood in his yard. Mai's face was bruised along one cheekbone, Lin had a cut on her arm. They were breathing hard. Mai gestured urgently toward the house. He didn't think, just ran downstairs and threw open the door. They pushed past him, scanning the darkness behind them. "They are coming," Mai whispered, "not far behind." "What happened?" "We refused to go back. Said we would choose our own path." She touched the bruise on her face without flinching. "Mr. Fang's enforcer did this. Said we dishonor our agreement. Dishonor our dead father's memory." Owen heard it then. Voices in the distance. The men were tracking them. The cellar. Under the kitchen he grabbed Mai's arm, pulling them toward the small door in the floor. "It's hidden under the rug." They hesitated, their eyes meeting his. In them, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. Trust. They nodded and let him lead them down into the darkness. The space was tight, barely tall enough to stand in, lined with preserved goods and stores for winter. Owen climbed down after them and pulled the door shut above them, throwing the rug back in place. Darkness swallowed them whole. He could hear their breathing, fast and shallow. Feel the heat of their bodies in the confined space. They were standing so close, a triangle of warmth and fear. "They will search the house," Lin whispered, her first words to him, her voice a low murmur against his neck. "Then we stay quiet." Footsteps above, heavy boots crossing his floor. Owen's hand found Mai's in the dark, and she gripped it hard enough to hurt. Lin's hand pressed against his chest, and he knew she could feel his heart hammering against her palm. Voices overhead, angry, searching, the sound of furniture being moved, glass breaking. They were tearing his house apart. Mai's fingers curled into his shirt, her body tense against his. In the pitch black, every other sense heightened, the jasmine smell of their hair, the warmth of their skin, the way Mai's breath hitched when his thumb moved across her knuckles without him meaning it to. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The men moved through every room, came close to the kitchen twice. Owen held his breath each time, feeling the sisters do the same. Their bodies pressed closer in the confined space. And even with the danger above them, even with death so close, he was acutely aware of every point where they touched. Finally, the footsteps retreated. Voices faded. Silence settled like dust. But none of them moved. Mai's forehead rested against his collarbone now. Her breathing steadier but still fast. His free hand had somehow found her waist, fingers splayed against the cotton of her tunic. "Owen," her voice was barely audible. "What you said before, about never being with a woman. Not the best time for that conversation." There may not be another time. She lifted her head, and even in the darkness, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. "They will not stop looking for us. If they find us with you, they will kill all of us." "Then why did you come here?" The answer came not in words, but in action. Her lips found his in the darkness, and every thought in his head scattered like leaves in wind. She kissed him with a hunger that took his breath away, her hands moving to his face, his neck, his shoulders. He responded instinctively, pulling her closer, tasting desperation and desire on her lips. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "That is why," she said. "Because in 6 months of grief and rage and loneliness, you are the only thing that has made us feel alive again." "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, voice rough. "Neither do we anymore." Her fingers traced his jaw in the darkness. "But we know we cannot go back. And we know we cannot stop thinking about you." Above them, the house was silent. The men were gone, but none of them moved to leave the cellar. Not yet. Because in this small, dark space, pressed together with danger all around, something had shifted between them that could not be undone. Mai and Lin stayed. For 3 days, they stayed, and Owen's quiet world became something else entirely, something charged and alive and terrifying in its intensity. They worked alongside him without being asked, helped him repair the damage the men had done, hauled water from the well, moved with an efficiency that spoke of hard-earned survival skills. And every moment they spent together, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken things. On the second morning, they were in the barn tending to his 2 horses. Owen reached for the bridle at the same moment Mai did, and their hands collided. Both froze. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds before they pulled away, but his skin burned where her fingers had brushed his. "Sorry," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. "Do not apologize for touching me." Her voice carried an edge that made him look up. She was watching him with that direct gaze that stripped away pretense, Lynn a silent echo beside her. "Unless you do not want to." "That's not." He stopped, unsure how to finish. Mai stepped closer, close enough that he could see the pulse beating at her throat. "You are afraid of wanting me. Of wanting us." "Why?" "Because I don't know how to want someone like this." The admission came out raw and honest. "Everything I know about you tells me you're dangerous, that I should send you away. But every time I try to think about you leaving, I can't breathe right." Something softened in her expression. She reached up and touched his face, fingers gentle against his cheek. "You think we are not afraid? We are terrified. 6 months ago, we buried our father. Swore we would never let anyone close again. And then you appear with your soft hands and softer heart. And we cannot stop ourselves from wanting things we have no right to want." "What things?" Instead of answering, she kissed him, slower this time than in the cellar. Less desperate, more deliberate, learning the shape of his mouth, the taste of him. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she made a sound low in her throat that sent heat through his entire body. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "That. We want that. Want to feel something other than grief. Want to remember what it is to be touched with gentleness instead of as a possession. And I want." He trailed off, suddenly shy despite having just kissed her. "Say it. I want to know what it feels like to be with someone, to not be alone anymore." His hands tightened on her waist. "But more than that, I want it to be you. Not just anyone. You 2-inch." Mai pulled back enough to look at him fully. "You make it very hard to keep our walls up, Owen Hayes." "Good," he surprised himself with the word, with the confidence behind it. "Because you've already torn down all of mine." That evening they sat on his porch as the sun set, Owen in the middle, Mai's shoulder touching his on one side, Lynn's on the other. Hands intertwined. None spoke much. Didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sound of crickets and the occasional call of a night bird. "Tell me about him," Owen said finally. "The man you ran from." Mai was quiet for a long moment. "His name is Mr. Fang. He held my father's debts. When our father died, he claimed us. As payment. Intended to sell us as wives to his business partners. As if we are property to be transferred." "You're not property," Owen said, his voice fierce. "No," Lynn spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "We are not." She turned to look at him. "That is why we will not go back. Even if it means being hunted." She stopped, head snapping toward the eastern trees. Mai and Owen saw it too. A thin line of smoke rising against the darkening sky. Not from a campfire, from multiple torches. "They have brought more men," Mai said, voice gone flat. "They are not searching anymore. They are coming to take us by force." Owen stood, his heart sinking. "How many?" "Too many." She and Lynn rose beside him, hands going to the knives at their belts. "They will not leave without us. And if you stand in their way, they will kill you without hesitation." The torches were moving closer, a line of fire cutting through the growing darkness, coming straight for his ranch, coming for them. And Owen knew that in the next few minutes, he would have to make a choice that would alter the course of his life forever. 7 men emerged from the darkness, torches casting harsh shadows across their faces. The lead man, the same one from before, stepped forward. His eyes found Mai and Lin, then moved to Owen with open contempt. He spat on the ground. The girls come with us. Fang is tired of waiting. Mai answered, stepping in front of Owen, Lin flanking her. We are not going anywhere. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. That ain't your choice to make, sweetheart. You belong to Mr. Fang. You dishonored your father's debt by running. You come back now, or we burn this place to the ground with this farm boy inside. He gestured with his torch. Fang has other buyers waiting. This ain't negotiable. Owen looked at the 7 armed men, looked at the torches, looked at the 2 women standing rigid beside him, caught between 2 worlds. Every instinct he had screamed that he should step back, let them go, save himself. He was just one man against 7 hired guns. He had no chance. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. No, the single syllable cut through the night. The men shifted, hands moving to pistols. Mai and Lin turned to look at him, eyes wide with something that might have been fear or hope or both. Owen, you cannot, Mai began. I said, no. He stepped forward, placing himself between them and the men. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. They stay here. Because they want to. Not because I'm forcing them, not because you're forcing them. Because they chose to. The lead man's expression darkened. You're a fool. One man can't stand against us. Your death will mean nothing. Maybe Owen's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. But if dying means they get to choose their own lives, then I'll die. Because that's what decent men do. They stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Even when they're terrified, even when they know they'll lose. Mai made a sound behind him, something between a gasp and a sob. Her hand tightened on his shirt, Lin's hand finding his other arm. The lead man studied Owen for a long moment. Then he almost smiled. Why? Why would you die for a couple of runaways who ain't yours? Owen didn't hesitate. They are mine, and I'm theirs. We choose each other. When he said it, something shifted in the men's stances. The lead man's eyes moved between Owen and the sisters, seeing something there that made him pause. He was a hired thug, not a zealot. He was paid to retrieve property, not to die in a pointless gunfight over a principle. He weighed the determined look on Owen's face, the deadly stillness of the 2 women behind him, and the single rifle in Owen's hands. He spat again. They ain't worth the bullets. Fang can find other girls. He turned away. Let's go. The other men followed, torches disappearing back into the forest. Before the leader vanished completely, he looked back one last time, not at the sisters, but at Owen. And in that look was something that might have been respect. They stood in the yard long after the torches disappeared, still in their defensive triangle, neither speaking. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on them. They had chosen exile, had chosen him over the devil they knew. You did not have to do that, Mai said finally, her voice rough. Stand in front of us like that. You could have died. I know. Then why? Lin asked, her voice soft. Owen turned to face them fully. In the moonlight, he could see tears tracking down their cheeks. The first time he had seen them cry. Because 6 months ago, I buried my father and thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. Thought that was just what my life would be. Empty, quiet, safe. He reached up and brushed away one of Mai's tears with his thumb, then one of Lin's. And then you 2 showed up and made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. Made me want things I didn't know how to want. And I realized that safety isn't living. It's just existing. Mai closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and Lin mirrored the gesture. We have given up everything for this. For you. I know. And I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it. Mai opened her eyes, and the vulnerability he saw there took his breath away. These strong, fierce women who had faced down armed men were looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted beneath their feet. Take me inside, she whispered. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Owen, I need to feel something real, something good. She stopped, swallowing hard. I need you. They barely made it through the door before she was kissing him, hands in his hair, body pressed against his with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. He responded instinctively, backing her toward the stairs, stumbling over his own feet in his haste. Lynn followed silently, closing and barring the door, a guardian to the last. Slow down, Mai murmured against his mouth, even as her hands pulled at his shirt. We have time now. All the time we need. They made it to his bedroom, and suddenly the urgency shifted into something else, something tender. Mai's hand slowed as she unbuttoned his shirt, fingers tracing the planes of his chest with a gentleness that made him shiver. He touched her in return, fumbling with the ties of her tunic, clumsy but careful. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, voice shaking. Neither do I, she caught his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. The men our father would have chosen for us. It would have been duty. With Mr. Fang, it was ownership. I do not know how to do this slowly, how to make it mean something beyond just bodies joining. Then we'll figure it out together. What followed was awkward and fumbling and utterly perfect in its imperfection. Mai guided him with patient hands, showing him where to touch, how to move. He learned the landscape of her body in the darkness, every scar and curve and soft spot. She gasped when he kissed the hollow of her throat, arched into him when his hands found her hips. When they finally came together, she made a sound that was half sob, half moan. And he understood this wasn't just physical release. This was two people who had been alone too long, finding home, finding comfort, finding peace. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin damp with sweat, breathing hard. Mai's head rested on his chest, his hand moving slowly up and down her spine. Lynn sat in a chair by the window, a silent silhouette against the moonlight, watching over them. 6 months, Mai said finally, voice quiet. 6 months we thought we would never feel safe again. Thought we would carry grief and anger until they killed us. And then you appeared with your soft heart and your impossible courage and everything changed. Owen pressed a kiss to her hair. I was so afraid. I know. We could feel you shaking. She lifted her head to look at him. And in her eyes was something warm and soft that he had never seen before. But you did it anyway. That is what bravery is. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. My father used to say that. He was a wise man. She settled back against his chest, fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. What happens now, Owen? We cannot go back. Those men will not come for us again. But we are alone in this world except for you. Then we build something new together. He tightened his arms around her. Stay here. Help me run this ranch. We'll make it work somehow. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we've all been making it harder than it needs to be by trying to do everything alone. He felt her smile against his chest. Besides, I need someone who actually knows how to fix a fence properly. I've been doing it wrong for months. Her laugh was soft and genuine, and he realized it was the first time he had heard her truly laugh. From the chair, he heard Lynn let out a small, soft sound of amusement. The sounds of it filled something inside him he hadn't known was empty. 3 months passed like water running through fingers. The ranch that had been Owen's prison of solitude became something else entirely. A home, a life, a future he had never dared to imagine. Mai and Lynn moved through the property with the confidence of people who belonged there. Lynn, with her quiet patience, had gentled the mare that had been skittish since his father died. Mai, with her sharp mind, had expanded the garden, planting herbs and vegetables. Together, they turned the empty spare room into a workspace where they crafted goods they could trade at the distant settlement. Owen watched them one morning from the porch, coffee cup warm in his hands. They were in the corral with the horses, their movements a fluid, mirrored dance of certainty and skill. They were different now. He was different now. Could feel it in the way he carried himself. The way he no longer flinched at his own shadow. The way he could look at his reflection and see someone who had chosen courage over safety, who had stood up to armed men, who had learned what it meant to truly be with another person, body and soul. Mai looked up and caught him watching, her mouth curved in that small smile that still made his heart stumble. She and Lin walked over, climbing the porch steps and settling beside him on the bench he had built, one on each side. Their shoulders pressed against his in comfortable familiarity. "You are staring again," Mai said, taking his coffee and stealing a sip. "Can't help it. Still can't believe you're real." "We are very real," Lin said, her own small smile gracing her lips. She handed back the cup, her fingers lingering on his. "And we are not going anywhere." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. In the distance, birds called to each other. The horses moved peacefully in the corral. Everything was still and right in a way it had never been before. "Do you regret it?" Owen asked quietly. "Giving up everything?" Mai was silent for a moment, considering. "We gave up a life where we had no voice, no choice, where we would have been passed from one man to another like possessions." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were clear and certain. "What we found here is worth more than everything we left behind. We found freedom. We found partnership. We found a man who sees us as equals, not a burden or a prize." "I found the same thing," he said, setting down the coffee cup and taking both their hands in his. "You saved me, you know. I was just existing, waiting for life to happen to me. And then you crashed into my world and made me realize that life only happens if you're brave enough to reach for it." Mai leaned her head against his shoulder. Lin did the same on the other side. "We saved each other," they said in unison. A month later, they stood together in the evening light, surveying the ranch that had grown under their combined efforts. The fences were strong. The garden thrived. The horses were healthy and well-trained. They had built something real, something that would last. Owen pulled them close, and they came willingly, fitting against him like they had always belonged there. "My father used to tell me that a man's wealth isn't measured in gold or land. It's measured in the moments that take his breath away." He kissed Mai, then Lin. "And I'm the richest man alive." They laughed, the sound warm and full, and kissed him back as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire. In those kisses was everything they had been through. All the fear and courage and choice and consequence. All the loneliness that had been transformed into connection. They had all been broken in different ways. All been alone. All been trapped by circumstances they couldn't control. But together they had built something none of them could have created alone. A life chosen freely. A love earned through vulnerability and trust. And in the end, that was worth more than any kingdom any of them had left behind.